All right, continuing on with lesson 11.1, angle and line relationships. Now that we've discussed how an angle is named, let's look at the different types of angles. We have three major types of angles here. We can have an acute angle. So here I am drawing an angle, again, made up of two rays with a common vertex. If the measure of the angle, is less than 90 degrees, it's acute. So this example right here would be an example of an angle that's acute. If the measure of the angle is exactly 90 degrees, that makes it a right angle. And you guessed it, if the measure of the angle is greater than 90 degrees, the measure is greater than 90 degrees, well, that makes it obtuse. And by the way, gosh, I guess we do have one more type of angle. I didn't think about that. We also have a straight angle. Well, that's kind of weird, but it's true. A straight angle is just a line like this, a straight angle, dunk, 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 dunk. Well, that is equal to 180 degrees. So those are some types of angles. And then let's also talk about the fact that not only do we have angles, but we have pairs of angles. And there are some special angles that are created by intersecting lines. So if I have two straight lines and they intersect one another, they create two sets of pretty special angles. So I'll go ahead and name these angles inside these two intersecting lines, and I can tell you about vertical angles. So vertical angles are two angles. They are two angles across a common vertex. Two angles across a common vertex, and they're made up of the same lines. So in this example, angle 2 and angle 4 would be examples of vertical angles. And here's the special thing about vertical angles. The measure of angle 2 is congruent. So there's a funky looking equal sign with a wavy line on top of it, and that's the symbol in geometry that we use for equal. We just use the word congruent, and it just means that they have equal measures. So the measure of angle 2 is going to be congruent with the measure of angle 4, and that's what happens when you have these intersecting lines creating vertical angles. Well, when you have intersecting lines creating vertical angles, you end up with two sets of vertical angles. So not only do we have angle 2 and angle 4 being congruent, and I'll use these angle arcs here to indicate a different set, it's true that the measure of angle 1 is going to be congruent with the measure of angle 3. So vertical angles is one special type of angle relationship or pairs of angles that you'll be looking at in this lesson. We also have this idea of complementary. I'm just going to keep going. I know this video is getting a little bit long, but complementary angles, well, complementary angles, that would be two angles with a sum of 90 degrees. And they don't have to be adjacent. Oh my goodness, there we go. They don't have to be adjacent, but typically when we look at complementary angles, we see them as being adjacent. And adjacent just means that they're two angles that share a common ray. So here's an example of two adjacent angles because they have a common ray. They're side by side. Adjacent angles have a common ray. I'll just put a note over here about that. They have a common ray, and you could say that they are side by side. I think that makes sense. They have that inner ray. But so complementary angles, let's get back to that. I'll put some numbers in here. So I have an angle 1 and angle 2. Complementary angles, measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2, well, they sit inside a right angle, so their sum must be 90 degrees. And not only do we have complementary angles, we have another type of pair of angles, and those are called our supplementary angles. And supplementary angles, well, they're two angles. They're two angles with a sum of 180 degrees. And just like the complementary angles, they don't have to necessarily be adjacent side by side, but oftentimes when we look at sets of supplementary angles, we see a straight line, something like this, And then we have a vertex sort of somewhere on that straight line, and we have another ray coming up from it. So there's a fantastic example of, here's my two angles here, of some supplementary angles. So I can say the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 must equal 180 degrees.